Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I'm your host, Kiana Canada. Welcome back to Kiana's Show. This evening, I am recording on my phone, so I'm not really sure if the quality is going to be up to par, but it's all we have at this moment. I am on Facebook Live recording this video. I want you to keep in mind that I am still undergoing transnational repression and that authorities do have access to my Facebook account. So if this video is chopped up and taken out of context, please understand that that is the state agents and their cyber hackers, their proxies that are cutting up the video and taking it out of context. You have a responsibility to watch this video in full and to keep it in its proper context. I cannot be held responsible for any claims or conclusions that cyber hackers and authority figures have taken out of context. In this video, we are going to be discussing two issues. We're going to be discussing the modus operandi of the United States and Ireland. These are perpetrators that are actively partaking in transnational repression. I do understand that there is ambiguity around the United States' activity and the Irish government's activity in transnational repression. Howsoever, I did send an open letter or uploaded an open letter to Irish politicians asking them to call on their allies as well as the Irish government to release information regarding transnational repression. If they believe that I'm wrong about the United States and the Irish governments being the perpetrators of transnational repression, they have a responsibility to release that information to me and to make that information public. Until they do so, the evidence that I have within my custody demonstrates that the United States as well as the Irish governments are collaborating and partaking in transnational repression against me. So later in this live stream, we will be discussing the United States' and the Irish government's modus operandi of transnational repression. But I also want to discuss Basma Mostafa's interview with the Foreign Policy Center. So she sat down to do an interview with the Foreign Policy Center as well as Center for Freedom of Media, and that is with the University of Sheffield. And in Basma's interview, she speaks about proxies and diplomats working together across several EU countries. And she tells us that she has been put through transnational repression and that the perpetrator of, or the state that's putting her through transnational repression is the Egyptian government. I take that to mean that she is from Egypt or that she has Egyptian nationality, and that would bring her, I guess, that would support the argument that the Egyptian government is perpetrating transnational repression against her. During this interview with Foreign Policy Center, she makes clear that the authorities hacked her accounts on multiple occasions. And this follows the phenomenon of digital transnational repression. And she tells us that she had been locked out of her accounts and that she believes that journalists and human rights defenders are not believed when they submit complaints about transnational repression. And one of the reasons she gives as to why she feels that journalists and human rights defenders are not believed is because there's not really enough information regarding transnational repression. And so we learned that Basma had undergone transnational repression for approximately 3 years. And this is when she was living in Germany. She had spoken out in Germany, addressed her complaints to the German authorities, who did not take action. And she continued to submit complaints in Germany about transnational repression and being victimized within their jurisdiction, but still no action. And that led her to seek out protection elsewhere. And she began to look elsewhere, such as the United Kingdom, wondering if that is where her complaints would be addressed. Now, I think it's the details are a bit vague. Now that I'm thinking back to Basma's story, it becomes clear to me that perhaps she's still in Germany, but her perpetrator was in the United Kingdom. And so her perpetrator was in the United Kingdom, and she was contacting the UK authorities to possibly bring charges against her perpetrator, much like how I did here in Belfast. When I was undergoing transnational repression, I called on the Irish authorities to prosecute or to even investigate Bradley Hill, Maurice O'Sullivan, Donald Hurley, the persons that were within the within the Republic of Ireland that were very close in proximity to me, who were aiding and abetting the actions of intelligence agencies and taking my documents to intelligence agencies, engaging in transnational repression. Sorry, I had to charge my phone. And so as you can see, Basma and myself, we have similar experiences where we are in a host country and we are attempting to report our perpetrators that are residing in another country. And so in my specific situation, I think I have really a textbook case of transnational repression, because the transnational repression started in the Republic of Ireland. And I lived in multiple countries before I resided in the Republic of Ireland, or a couple of countries before I resided in the Republic of Ireland. I lived in Sweden and Canada and didn't experience this at all. And so when I fled Republic of Ireland and I came to Northern Ireland, those state agents and their intelligence agencies crossed the border with their activity and continued to perpetrate me. So that is a textbook example of transnational repression. And so she makes clear to us in her interview that UK police lacked understanding of her complaint, despite her using terminology outlined in the Home Office guidelines regarding transnational repression. And keep in mind, the same thing has happened in my own case. The UK government has outlined ways in which you can report acts of transnational repression. And I have followed those guidelines from the Home Office without my complaint being investigated thoroughly. And that's what is deeply concerning to me. And so, like Basma, she states that despite submitting a complaint to the United Kingdom, who officially received her complaint, she has not received any information following up on her claims or whether there will be an outcome. And this reminds me of my own situation, because I submitted multiple complaints to the National Crime Agency, complaints to the UK police in London, complaints to the Police Service of Northern Ireland, complaints to the Garda Síochána, complaints to action fraud, complaints to this place, complaints to that place, complaints to the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission. Presently, I'm calling on multiple politicians from the Alliance Party as well as the Social Democratic Labour Party to address this very issue. My argument is that if the authorities believe that my claims and my assertions regarding transnational repression are unfounded, then they do have a responsibility to call on the authorities to release information as it relates to transnational repression and the perpetrators that are actively involved in it. And so I'm still waiting on a response from the authorities regarding this specific area, and waiting on a response, not the authorities, but waiting on a response from the politicians from the Alliance Party, as well as waiting on a response from the Social Democratic Labour Party. What is regrettable is that in the interview that Basma had with the Foreign Policy Center, she stated that she recommended not reporting it to law enforcement. So she recommended not to report transnational repression to law enforcement. And so why was that? And it could be that, to reiterate, complaints are not taken seriously to the states that are actively partaken in transnational repression are undermining the victim's complaint and working alongside with police. It's not unheard of for police agencies in other nations, such as the perpetrating nation, to work alongside with the host country. And I think when we think about this, very deeply, we come to understand that a lot of states take the word of the home country without looking deeply into it and trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together to understand how the victim can be put through transnational repression. And so with Basma's story, she says she recommends not reporting it to law enforcement because, in her opinion, they are not taking that seriously. But in her interview with the Foreign Policy Center, she does acknowledge that 3 days before she sat down with the Foreign Policy Center, that the UK government reached out to her and said that they were looking into her complaint regarding transnational repression and investigating it. And that could very well be because there is eyes on the complaint. And that's what we need. We need more eyes on complaints regarding transnational repression. Because if there is remaining silent about it, then you give the perpetrating countries an inch, they'll take a mile. And that's just the truth. That's the way to look at it. And another way to look at it is whether or not the theories regarding transnational repression should be decolonized, because the lens that we're often looking through as it relates to transnational repression is pointing to state actors in the global South. But as we know, the global South is not the only states that perpetrate transnational repression. It is also the global North. And so what redress do victims in the global North have when they are being victimized by this practice? And they are citizens of the global North, is the question. And I think it's really unfair that we continue to talk about the perpetrators within the global the global South that are partaking in transnational repression, but we're not acknowledging the perpetrators in the global north who are victimizing citizens of the global north. And so my theory regarding Basma's complaint and the investigation into her allegations is that perhaps the authorities got wind that she was sitting down for an interview with Foreign Policy Center and decided to get ahead of it by investigating it 3 days before she had that interview with Foreign Policy Center. And this is one thing that I have recognized about states that are engaging in transnational repression, is that if you hold them responsible for their actions, there is a high probability that they'll back down. If you say nothing, they will continue their illegal behavior. So, returning back to the discussion that Basma had with the Foreign Policy Center, she stated that authorities are not trained on how to recognize the pattern and techniques of transnational repression. And I echo that sentiment because I don't think that human rights institutions within Belfast and perhaps within the UK, I'm not talking about all, but some, have a clear understanding of what transnational repression is. And I think that partly that's because their understanding of transnational repression is a country that is a developing country, or a country that is quote unquote third world. And this is their idea of who is perpetrating transnational repression a lot of the times. And when they're confronted with evidence that democracies are engaging in the same illegal practices, sometimes they can't wrap their minds around it, and then sometimes they are knowledge resistant. They refuse to acknowledge or don't want to acknowledge that democracies engage in this practice as well, because it makes them feel uncomfortable. And they find comfort sometimes in knowing that they can look to other countries that are dissimilar to themselves and say that these countries are the perpetrators of transnational repression, that these are practices that are, that certain countries engage in while other countries don't engage in it. So I want to reiterate that currently I am waiting on a response from several politicians that I have reached out to here in Belfast, from the Alliance Party as well as the Social Democratic Labour Party. I have uploaded an open letter to my YouTube account asking them to asking them to address transnational repression and to denounce acts of racialized violence. Not only have I did that, but I have also called on them to, I want to reiterate that if authority figures feel that my assertions around transnational repression are inadequate, unfounded, not complete, that I'm pointing to the wrong parties, then they have a responsibility to make those findings clear with me and to call on the authorities to release the information that they have. Now, I need to make clear that I have been researching this for several years, and the evidence does point to the United States and the Irish governments. But again, I am not knowledge resistant, and I'm open to more information regarding this. And so I need to also make it abundantly clear that my investigating transnational repression, I'm not doing that for any foreign government or any foreign group. I'm doing that because that was a practice that the authorities put me through. And I need to restate this, as I have done in multiple videos. I would have never knew I was being put through transnational repression had it not gone on so long. Like, the longer that it goes on, the more evidence continues to pile up that these are transnational reprisals. When they first started the acts, I really thought that it was a group within direct provision, but as I saw that no one investigated it, I saw that you couldn't complain about it, I saw that the authorities who had power to address it did not address it, I began to understand slowly that this was transnational repression. And so lastly, I want to pivot to Sienna Enstis. I think I'm pronouncing that last name wrong. I think it's Enstis. So Sienna Enstis. She does some work with the Citizen Lab, and she does a lot of work regarding digital transnational repression. And she speaks about deep fakes, AI videos that are being used against journalists, human rights defenders, activists, photos that are being used by authorities and their proxies, cyber intelligence firms, cyber security firms that are being used to defame, embarrass, discredit, shame, and isolate the victim. And even before I watched her video, I stated myself, I guess great minds think alike, I stated that this is going to be a significant issue with authority figures, cybersecurity agencies, intelligence agencies using AI to go after their political opponents and to go after journalists, human rights defenders, activists, etc. And that's deeply concerning to me. And in another video, we will discuss the Human Rights Council's position on journalism, the right to journalism, the right to activism. But again, I am not going to be doing that in this video. What I want to move to now is another modus operandi that the Irish government and the United States government, so UK, Northern Ireland, US, use when they are putting victims through transnational repression. And that is the email trap. And what is the email trap? I haven't given it official name because currently I'm not researching it. I'm just talking about it. But essentially it's where the authorities, the intelligence agencies, and the cybersecurity agencies are instructing lawyers, solicitors, human rights organizations, politicians, social community groups. They're instructing all of these persons to tell you to send all of your communications via email. And why do they do that? Well, there are a couple of reasons why they do that. First, that allows them to have control over the communication. So if you communicate via email, then they can do a number of things. One, they can read the communication and respond to it. So in order to read it or respond to it, or, well, if they read it, they don't necessarily have to intercept it, but to respond to the communication, there is a process of where they intercept the communication. If the authorities or the organizations or the solicitors don't allow them access to the email account, in some instances, the authorities, the solicitors, the groups, the organizations will hand over access to their email accounts and allow the state agents and the cybersecurity agents to use the email accounts to send you communications. And so what does that do? That allows them to control the narrative and to control the communication. If they are communicating with you, then they can actually stop you from receiving justice. They can stop you from being able to communicate with a real person who has the authority to stop their illegal behavior and respond in a way that neutralizes your complaints. That way they can wear you out by attrition. And so, as I have undergone transnational repression for a number of years, the primary statement that I have been given is send an email, and it seems pretty forceful and coercive. Send an email, communicate via email. And to reiterate, the reason why they want to communicate via email is because that gives them control over the communication. That gives them control over sending you communications, because sometimes these cybersecurity agencies, these intelligence agencies will communicate with you directly, sending you the communication, pretending to be the solicitors, or pretending to be the organization, or pretending to be the human rights organization, or pretending to be the social community, communicating with you directly. And there is a technical term for this. This is called man-in-the-middle attack. It's essentially where the cybersecurity agency or the intelligence agency will capture the communication, intercept it, insert themselves within as a party to that communication. And while you're thinking that you're communicating with organization B, or solicitor C, or human rights organization D, you are really actively communicating with this intelligence agency. They're able to capture all those communications, respond to them as if that you're responding to, you know, this actual organization or the solicitor that you believe that you've contacted. And so, ladies and gentlemen, there is a way in which they do this with phone calls as well, but the most important thing that differentiates a phone call from an email is that with a phone call, you get to hear a voice over the phone. And you get to hear a person claiming that they're with an organization, or claiming that they're with a solicitor's office, or claiming that they are the Human Rights Commission, or claiming that they are with a social community. And you get to hear that, and that gives you a level of transparency and accountability, whereas with an email, you don't, because at any time, all of these bodies can say, well, we didn't send that communication, or they can agree that their email accounts were hacked as well. And so they didn't communicate with you. But when you're communicating with them over the phone, there is a voice, a person on the other end that you're talking to, claiming to be from organization A, claiming to be from organization C, claiming to be the solicitors, claiming to be the human rights bodies. And so there's a level of responsibility there, and that is your evidence. And so my recommendation for anyone who is undergoing transnational repression is to not communicate via email. Don't communicate via email as it relates to personal confidential communications. Now, you can communicate via email if you are engaging in benign communications. Like, say, for instance, you want to go to a party or go to a discussion and you need to know the time and date. Yes, you're likely going to receive that. That is, it's safe to communicate that way. Or if you're sending communications that are benign in a way that is not calling attention to transnational repression, then all of those communications are likely going to be safe. But any communication where you are trying to reach out to other journalists, you're trying to communicate to human rights bodies, you're trying to file complaints, the authorities are in the business of intercepting these kinds of complaints. And so you may ask, well, Kiana, when is a safe time to communicate via email? And I would say a very safe time to communicate via email is when you have legal representation. And when you have solicitors or an organization that understands what is going on and is going to hold the authorities to account. But before then, before you secure legal representation, it is really not advisable for you to communicate via email, for you to send any confidential communications via email. These confidential communications can be altered to tell a different narrative and to put a different story, to put out a different story and to discredit you. So it's not safe for you to communicate via email. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Tell me what you think about this discussion regarding transnational repression. I will get this uploaded at some point this week. If you have any comments or if you'd like to have a discussion about transnational repression, I'm open to having that discussion. I have reached out to the Foreign Policy Center on a number of occasions to try and have a discussion about transnational repression. I'm not sure if they're being coerced by the UK, Irish, US authorities to not engage in this, or if that's a decision that they've made on their own. I'm not sure, but the further this goes on, the further we'll know the truth. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to talk to you next time. Bye-bye.